Hey, this is Sky. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Go check out my website at skysworld.com for life coaching and mentoring. It's Monday night. Just got done with some dinner. Had some spicy chicken and rice. It's a little too spicy. I'm still sweating. Gotta crank up the AC. I was talking with somebody this weekend about systemic racism. It's a frustrating conversation to me because I came from the bottom, and I've watched many people who were there with me, minorities of different races, black or Mexican, where they didn't make the same choices that I made. And they came from an equally difficult setup where they were poor, on welfare, living in the projects or in a low-income side of town, one parent in the house, usually just the mother, one income, multiple siblings, right? You know, that's the story. Terrible schooling, only schools around are terrible. Lots of crime, lots of danger, whatever. And I've watched people who went through that work hard, come home after school and do their homework instead of hang out on the block. They wouldn't be getting high. They wouldn't be going to parties. They wouldn't be fucking up in any way. They would go to church on Sunday with their parents. And they lived just an apartment or two down in the next building, in the same neighborhood. I remember when I was older and I was in my 20s hanging out on the block with other drug dealers, watching people that were also from my neighborhood, waving to them as they got in their car and they drove off to the community college. And they had 2 jobs and a daughter at home, and they're putting in time going to the community college. So they are proof, in my opinion, these types of people. Like, we can name all kinds of rags to riches stories, people that came from literally nothing, had it so hard, they were abused, they were kicked around, they had it the hardest, and they rose to the top. If not the top, they rose to a sustainable life. We talk about rags to riches, and that's always such a huge distance on a graph. But what about rags to middle class? That's the American dream. You get yourself a small house with a little white picket fence in a suburb neighborhood, and you came from a projects. I was born homeless. You come from the bottom and get to just middle class. Forget about rags to riches. Shit, you've made it, son. So is society really against you? I'm about personal responsibility. And that's a really hard lane to stay in. Because it's really easy to start blaming. It's really easy to start looking around and saying, well, I didn't survive because of this and that and the other thing. And I have to check myself often when I talk about, say, for example, business. If I haven't been successful in business, and I've run many businesses, and not all my businesses have been successful. I've had some failures of businesses. And I have found myself playing the victim, blaming society, saying, oh, a guy like me isn't meant to be successful, that nobody's going to give a guy like me a loan. I come up with all these different reasons why I can't do it, and none of those reasons are my own fault. Why didn't I make $1 million off that one business? And I'll give you 10 reasons, and there are all these complaints, and all we can do after that conversation is sit there and shake our heads and be like, man, that's fucked up. It's all a cop-out. It's all bullshit. It's victimhood mindset. It's weakness. Because I've seen people rise to the top. And if they can do it, I can do it. If they can do it, you can do it. Anybody can do it. You have to keep asking yourself, is society really against you? This is the question that I'm trying to figure out. Is society forcing you to be a deadbeat dad? Society, it's somehow systemic racism, it's the government, it's your neighbors, it's society that keeps you from taking an active role in your child's life. It's society that made you marry that cunt bitch that you can't stop hating. Society made you marry her. We all held a gun to your head. We dragged you out of your house and held a gun to your head, and dragged her out of her house and held a gun to her head, and we forced you to get married, right? No, you gave her a ring and you thought that was the sweetest pussy you ever tasted. You failed to get to know her. Turns out she was a psycho bitch. You could have learned that shit. Why don't you take any personal responsibility for your decisions? A lot of guys refuse to work. I remember sitting on the block refusing to work myself, complaining about how society's not set up for a guy like me, and I refused to get a job. Sky, why don't you go get a job? For what? And work for $5 an hour, whatever minimum wage was? Fuck that shit. Only fools do that shit. Stooges do that shit. The working man is a fucking fool. That's what I used to think, and you couldn't convince me out of it. And my reason for all that, and say, why would you think that? Because society's against guys like me, right? It's not taking personal responsibility. There's all kinds of people that work for nothing. They start at the bottom, and they work hard, and they end up successful. We could name lots and lots and lots of stories, and the weak man sits there and rolls his eyes. Well, I could never do that. Well, that's different. If you refuse to do it, that's different. Life is about choice. Take personal responsibility, you weak fuck. Did society force you to drop out of school? You're not even a high school graduate. The most basic level of schooling, you couldn't even do that. Did society force you to do that? Society forced you to become a drug addict? We held you down and we banged you up with some heroin. It was us that did it to you. Society did it to you. You chose to do it. Take some responsibility. You're 450 pounds. And that's society. You have diabetes and it's society. It's systemic racism. You choose to get whatever food you go to the same grocery store I do. I see fat fucks at the grocery store putting all kinds of chips and sodas and all kinds of terrible stuff on the conveyor belt. But that somehow it's society's fault that you eat that way. Is it society's fault that you have no faith, that you don't believe in God, that you never go to church, that you're atheist, that you reject any sort of higher power, but then you feel completely alone, desperately alone, all the time alone? It's society's fault that you have no faith? There's churches on every fucking block. It's society's fault you can't find one? We have freedom of religion. You go to a city like LA or even Orlando here near me, anywhere, any city, man, they have religions of churches that you never even knew existed. Is it society's fault that you can't save any money, that you're always broke? And you say, well, inflation and taxes and all this stuff, but then you watch other people around you that are making money, and what is it, that they're lucky? Everybody's just lucky and you're unlucky? It's just your mindset. It's society's fault that you have that mindset of weakness, of I can't, of I won't, I'm not worthy. Is that society's fault that you think you're not worthy? I don't know. We could go on with this, but I think you get it. It's all just food for thought.